Part 4. Both retaking the city and freeing its citizens were trivial before the power of the Saucer King. The attacking paladins and militiamen were virtually unhurt, and while some of the imprisoned residents had lost their lives in the chaos, it was a shockingly small amount. This outcome was only possible due to the Saucer King's presence. To the point where some people thought, if only we had handed everything to him from the start, we might not have need to lose anyone. Everyone was smiling as Nia and the Saucer King walked down the street, whether they were rejoicing over being freed or shedding tears over a bowl of hot soup. Although they had been told that their freedom was thanks to the Saucer King's aid. Once they saw the Saucer King moving around in person, the residents' eyes were filled with shock, confusion and aversion, but that could not be helped either. Of course, whether Nia could accept this state of affairs was a different matter entirely. While she wanted to do something in case the Saucer King was displeased, it would seem the man himself did not seem to mind. That being the case, it would be very rude of Nia to do something on her own. Nia addressed the back of the Saucer King, who was walking in front of her. "Your Majesty, where are you going now?" The Saucer King was looking at his palm, and he did not look back at Nia. I'm heading for this big building in the center of town. If that's an enemy base, I'll need to investigate it as soon as possible. The paladins are all tied up with tasks like freeing the captured residents, distributing food, treating the wounded, imprisoning the captured demi-humans, and other things. Nia nodded slightly. That building is quite large. If the paladins judged it to be a base, shouldn't they have already investigated it? While the Saucer King was the one who had conquered the city, the minor assorted tasks after that had been given to the citizen soldiers and the paladins to complete. In that case, surely they would have inspected the building that was the Saucer King's objective. The Saucer King stopped walking for a moment and then looked intently at Nia. Then he shrugged and continued walking. Actually, I posted my subordinates outside to make sure the paladins did not draw near. So I doubt they've checked it yet. Then what you said earlier. Ms. Byroha, I have told you many things until now, but it would be best if you considered matters on your own from time to time. For instance, the reason why we're the ones who are going to investigate the building. Yes, Your Majesty. The Saucer King looked at his palm again. Within it was an item once worn by that demi-human, the late Busser. The Saucer King was appraising the item as he walked, using the power of magic to carefully examine it. From what the Saucer King said, the sword was called Sand Shooter. The armor was known as Turtle Shell. The shield was named Lancer's Merit. The horn coverings were called Charge Without Hesitation, the rings were Ring of Second Eye and Ring of Running, while the cape was called the Mantle of Protection. There also seemed to be other magic items like the necklace and such. Although he said none of them possessed any impressive enchantments, the Saucer King still seemed quite happy about them. Nia shifted her eyes from the Saucer King's back to the ground. And then she did as the Saucer King said, which was to ponder the reason why the Saucer King had to personally investigate that building. However, she did not reach any answer which made her think, that's it. However, if she asked the Saucer King for the answer because of that, surely he would be speechless. The thought of the Saucer King she so respected thinking of her as useless and casting her aside was terrifying. While she desperately tried to find the answer, the aforementioned building had already appeared before her eyes. Two undead beings, high wraiths, stood at the entrance to the building. As the Saucer King approached, they stepped aside to allow the Saucer King and Nia to pass. This seems to be the residence of the city's former lord. Nia was not too sure which noble had ruled this city. However, given the size of the city, he must have been more than a baron, but less than a count. Yes. Not even the undead have entered this place. We are the first to do so. Be careful. There might be more demi-humans who have not yet been subdued. Your Majesty. Then, she hesitated over whether she should say, "You should stop," but the other Nia in her quietly said that it ought to be fine if it were the Saucer King. I have to go here. This is the enemy headquarters, and it might be the lair of the demi-humans leader. While the only reason for that conclusion is because this building is very large, there might be a powerful being on par with Busa Aead of us. I want to neatly tie off all the loose ends in this city. After learning the answer to the question from just now, Nia suddenly pressed her head in realization. At the same time, gratitude flowed forth in her heart for the Saucer King's compassion. He didn't let the paladins get close because there might be powerful foes within. Unlike what he said just now, could it be that he wasn't willing to tell me about this because he felt embarrassed about fighting as someone else's shield? While Nia knew that thinking this way about the Saucer King was very rude, for some reason she felt the Saucer King was a little cute. Well, do you understand? The Saucer King looked at Nia's face as he asked that question. Nia nodded, and the Saucer King seemed happy as he replied. That's good. He's actually happy that I can understand him. What a gentle and kind person he is. Your servant understands why your Majesty does not wish to draw attention from others. Exactly. Then, you understand, right? I don't wish to stand out too much. Understood. The Saucer King looked like he was pondering something. For some reason that also looked very adorable. Let's go then. Yes. As a squire, she felt it was wrong to let the Saucer King walk out in front, but the Saucer King would not allow Nia to walk ahead of him. Nia looked with admiration at the back of the generous and magnanimous person before her. As his subordinate, watching a king led from the front was truly a heartwarming sight. After passing through the wide entrance, Nia asked a question. Where shall we begin our search? There doesn't seem to be any sign of others around. Your eyesight and hearing are both quite keen, Ms. Bairaha, but how about your sense of smell? Frankly speaking, I'm not too confident in my sense of smell. However, I think I'm better than most in that field. As for taste, I think mine is just average. However, I've never tasted poison before, so I can't be a poison taster or anything. Really now? Then, can you detect the smell of death and hatred? As he said, death and hatred, his kingly aura of dominion coiled up around him. Death and hatred. This way. The Saucer King set off. There was no trace of hesitation in his footsteps. He walked as though he was familiar with this place and what lay ahead of him. Death and hatred. These things shouldn't have a smell. Or could it be that His Majesty, who is undead, can make out such smells? That means whoever's making that smell is waiting here. Nia clutched the bow she had borrowed from the Saucer King. Depending on the circumstances, she would have to serve as the Saucer King's shield and step forward to fire her bow. Yet she had not been able to do anything during the battle with Busa. If she did not make herself more useful, there would be no reason for her to be here. They did not encounter any demi-humans along the way, and before long, they came to a door that was about the same size as the one they had passed through earlier. It was made of steel and iron, and thus looked very sturdy. This was what looked like a prison door, in the middle of a regular noble's residence. The juxtaposition filled Nia with a powerful sense of foreboding. It felt like she had been thrown into an unfamiliar and spine-chilling place. It's inside here. You can stay outside if you want, you know. It was impossible for Nia to make that choice. After seeing Nia shake her head, the Saucer King shrugged and opened the door. The Saucer King's strength opened the iron door with ease. However, it was surprisingly thick, so it must have been specially made. The Saucer King entered the room. Oh no, I can't believe I actually let His Majesty walk into this unknown place first. I'm an idiot. Nia hurriedly entered the room as well. While the heavy door had given her some inkling of what to expect, the interior of the room felt strange. It gave her the impression of being a torture chamber, although she had only heard descriptions of those. For starters, there were no windows. There were sticks set into the wall which glowed with a faint red light. This was not a natural light, but created by magic. There was a table made of wood and 2 wooden chairs. Further inside was another door, also made of iron. The Saucer King stood in the center of the room, carefully surveying every corner of it. This was when Nia noticed something on the table. Your Majesty, this looks like a piece of paper, but what's that written on it? The piece of paper Nia picked up was covered in illegible characters. They were certainly not written in Holy Kingdom script. They seem to be written in words from the demonic language. The Saucer King took out a monocle from a pocket. Perhaps he had noticed the surprised look on Nia's face, because he then proceeded to explain it. This is a magic item that can decipher written languages. That said, it drains a vast amount of mana. Byraha, do you know of any humans who can decipher these characters? With the ability to comprehend languages? Indeed. Or at least, someone who knows what these letters are. Also, any humans who have a talent which lets them decipher languages. My deepest apologies, I don't know about. Nia was simply a squire for the Paladin Order. She had not had the chance to come into contact with news about people like those. Granted, she had heard some rumors from her squire friends. For instance, my friend has a talent that lets him know many degrees hot water is. Of course, nobody knows the exact temperature, or my relative's a boat pilot who can walk 5 steps on water, but more than that and he'll sink, and so on. Most of them were abilities which would make people sigh and fall silent. There was no information about people who possessed abilities which the Saucer King wanted to know about. Really now? What a shame. Do you think Captain Custodio would know? Surely the captain of the Paladin Order would have come into contact with all sorts of intelligence. However, Nia did not know what to think of Remedios. Would the captain really allocate her headspace to information? I am not sure about that either. However, I feel it would be better to ask the vice-captain. Well, that's true. If I ask him. The Saucer King was probably stumbling over his words for the same reason Nia had. However, what do you intend to do if such a person does not exist? I did not intend anything. But if there was someone who could decipher the intelligence Jaldari left behind, our future plans would change, no? This was an obvious question which she could have answered on her own if she had just thought a little, yet she needed the Saucer King to explain it to her. Nia was ashamed about asking such a foolish question without giving it any thought. If there's nobody who can translate this, then I'll just have to expend mana to decipher it. However, doing so would lead to a disadvantageous state where I would have to be more wary of Jaldari. If I encountered Jaldari after expending a great deal of mana, my only option would be to flee. Although, this makes me quite curious. If it's just one piece of paper, then I shall read it. Will it be all right? Yes. I just need to pay more attention to my mana reserves. The Saucer King put on his monocle and looked at the paper. Although there were no visible signs of activation, it ought to have taken effect. The Saucer King looked like he was deciphering it now. That said, the Saucer King had no eyes, so it simply looked like he was reading it. After a short while, he took off the monocle. It was a lot of mana after all. Nia had seen priests wobble around shakily after using a great deal of mana, but she saw no signs of that in the Saucer King. However, comparing the Saucer King to an average magic caster was the height of rudeness. It was probably because he had enormous stores of mana. As Nia contemplated this, the Saucer King approached the door further within and gently slid open the vision slit. Nia heard many weak breathing sounds from inside, and her nose picked up the scent of blood. She gripped her bow tightly, thinking to squeeze between the Saucer King and the door, but the Saucer King stopped her with his hand. It meant, "Don't come here. Ms. Bairoha." The people using this room were not demi-humans but demons. The reason why I say that is because this paper contains details on the experiments the demons were performing. The demons' experiments? Even without further explanation, she was sure that these experiments were not decent or proper by any means. Yes, they seemed to have done things like chopping arms off and then reattaching them to other creatures, or cutting open the subject's abdomens and exchanging the internal organs within. They started with blood relatives as a control group, and they branched out to combinations of humans and other life forms, not just demi-humans but animals too, and then they healed them with magic to see what changes occurred. What dreadful experiments. Especially that blood relatives and body-swapping stuff. How could any sane person think of such things? All right. After conducting these experiments, it's natural that they'd want their test subjects to live. In particular, they want to keep them alive as long as possible until they find out why they die. Saying so, the Saucer King turned around, his back to the door. Then, he indicated the door behind him over his shoulder with his thumb. For some reason, Nia knew what was coming next. Some of those test subjects are in there. They're still alive despite having their bellies cut open. She had anticipated this, but the cruel reality still dyed Nia's mind stark white for an instant. After that, she burned with hatred for the demons who had conducted such inhumane experiments. Ms. Bairoha, get the priest right away. Fetch Captain Custodio too. Hurry. Understood. There was no need to question the reason why they had to be called over. Nia ran with all her might. In the corner of her mind, she heard a voice ask, "Is it really all right to leave His Majesty here by himself?" But this was an order from a powerful man who was both trustworthy and wise. There was no need to worry. He would not be wrong. The voice vanished in an instant. The priests opened the door and entered the room. The way their shoulders trembled for an instant illustrated the hideous conditions inside the cells better than words ever could. In front of her, the Saucer King showed the paper to Remedios and Gustavo. Have a look at this. This paper contains the names of the people in there and what happened to them. In addition, there are other papers with similar things written on them, or perhaps other things. Jaldabaoth's plans, for instance. I'm not too sure about that. Can you understand what's written on this paper? Remedios looked at the paper and wrinkled her brows, then immediately handed it to Gustavo. Gustavo shook his head too. I have no idea. But you understand it, don't you, Your Majesty? Ah, yes, by using the power of this magic item. However, that item drains a tremendous amount of mana. That mana must be conserved for the sake of doing battle with Jaldari. And what I want to know is, do any of you know anyone who can read these characters? Anyone who might have the chance of understanding it will do. No, I have no leads at all. While I feel there might be someone like them among the southern nobles, I think the possibility of that is very low. I see. Then how will you deal with this? On my part, I would hope you would put more effort into trying to decipher their script. Can we not borrow Your Majesty's magic item? I refuse. WashOurWorldAudio.com. This is a treasure of my nation. It is just as how you would not easily loan out the holy sword at your waist. And to magic casters like myself, magic items like these are more valuable than swords. Remedios and Gustavo looked at each other once more. I understand. Then let us work hard together. Also, we have a new problem. It would seem there are orc captives. How shall they be dealt with? It would seem the orcs had not attacked the Holy Kingdom out of their own will, but they were brought over by Jaldri. They had not yielded any useful information when questioned, and the Paladin Order was at a loss as to how to deal with them. I understand. Can you tell me where they are? Can you leave them to me? Yes. Thank you for your trouble. Gustavo supplied a rough location. Since the city was not very big, they would probably not get lost. After sketching a rough map in her mind, the cell door opened and an utterly exhausted-looking priest showed up. Oh, what happened? What about the condition of the people inside? We started by using healing magic on the survivors. This is the first time we've tried to heal the subjects of such inhumane experiments, so we'll stay here and observe them. If they're fine, we'll move them outside. At least, that's what I think. I see. Then, we'll send some paladins and militiamen over to help you move these people out. Understood, Captain Custodio. Then, I'll take my leave, Your Majesty. The priest opened the door again and went back into the cell. After watching the priest leave and concluding that there was nothing left to do, the four of them each went to their respective destinations. Naturally, the Saucer King and Nia parted ways with the other two and headed for the location of the orcs. That said, since there are demons around, it would be good if we had someone who could see the original forms of shapeshifters, the Saucer King said as he walked. While they could not verify the presence of demons in this city, the piece of paper with demonic characters on it suggested the possibility that there might be demons about, or that there might have been demons here recently. Can demons transform themselves? Demons like that do exist. They can shapeshift into men, women, or even animals. I see. Someone with the ability to see through shapeshifting or a similar talent. My deepest apologies. I have not heard of anyone with these abilities. No, I've heard legends about such things. I remember reading about them in a book. However, if you asked me if there were any of them around now, it seems I would be best served discussing this matter again with Captain Custodio. Then, is shapeshifting a form of illusion? I'm more familiar with petty tricks like illusions. For starters, shapeshifting is vastly different from illusions, but explain that will take a long time, so I'll skip it for now. However, looking down on illusions is very dangerous, you know. Illusions are a fearsome type of spell that becomes scarier the more skilled the caster is. Also, there are those illusionists who aren't satisfied with a surface understanding and choose to specialize along that path. So it's when they specialize. Yes. For example, there are spells like Perfect Illusion, which can defy all 5 senses. And beyond that, there are those who have refined their illusions to the utmost limit, who can use a certain skill once every few days to deceive the world itself. An illusion that could deceive a world was beyond her capacity to imagine. How exactly does that worldly illusion work? From what I know, it's a spell that lets you rewrite any aspect of the world, I think. Well, simply put, using an illusion like that could even bring the dead back to life. You're talking about an illusion, right? Oh yes. An illusion which tricks the world, the ultimate secret of illusions. By deceiving the world itself, an illusion can be made real. All she could think was, wow, even if one said that the pinnacle of illusion could do such a thing, it was so incredible that she did not quite understand what he was saying. So, does nobody manage the inborn talents of this country? No, I've never heard of it before. Does the Sorceress Kingdom do such things? My country does not have that practice either. I plan to do so in the future, but that will require considerable effort. It might end up being a matter of 10 or more years in the future. The Saucer King had already envisioned the events of the next 10 years in his mind. This was the difference between a king and a commoner. In other words, a tremendous difference. The orcs were held in a building whose windows were boarded up from the outside. This was quite a big structure, probably the second or third largest in this city. There were many paladins gathered at the entrance. It would seem they were on guard against what was inside. After seeing the Saucer King approach, the paladins genuflected before him to express their respect. "I've heard from Captain Custodio that the orcs are in this building. May I enter?" "Yes. Of course you may, Your Majesty." "Then you should go from this place and return to what you should be doing." The paladins looked up. "But the captain ordered us to be stationed here. We may not leave our posts." "Did she now? Then I take back my previous words." Saying so, the Saucer King passed between the paladins and pushed open the door. Naturally, Nia was following him. There was a sour odor in the air which seared Nia's nose. This was not poison gas, but the smell reminded Nia of when she had once followed a paladin to a jail. In addition, there were other smells mixed into it, smells that made her want to throw up. This is, when she heard the captain mention it earlier, she had thought about why the orcs had been specially brought along. Nia knew that she was about to learn the truth, but at the same time she deployed the wings of her imagination. If this was not just a problem that the orcs faced, if there was a grand alliance against Jaldari, would the demi-humans who wanted to fight back against him rally to their banner? As Nia thought all this, the Saucer King kept pushing doors open as he advanced. One could say that letting the Saucer King go first was a matter of fact now. They crossed rooms and passed through corridors. Just by walking, she realized that this place was filthier than a jail. The place was filthy with blood, vomit, and other detritus. The conditions here were so terrible that there was no way to imagine what had happened here. Orcs were demi-humans around the height of a man, with porcine facial features. They were said to be a species that loved cleanliness. They would not be happy to live in such a place. TL note: the pigment depiction of orcs apparently derives from Ludovico Ariosto's Orlando Furioso, where they had piggish features. Other depictions include the original corrupted Elfurics by Tolkien and the Warhammer Greenskins. It seems Maruyama has decided to make them full-on pigbeastmen. No, this is not a translation of the CNTL note below. Nia watched the hem of the Saucer King's cloak. While she was worried about how his magnificent garments might be stained, she could not tell him to wait outside either. After all, nobody could possibly speak for the wise Saucer King. Soon, Nia's keen senses picked up traces of many creatures breathing and moving aed of them. There was also what sounded like crying children and mothers trying to comfort them. Orcs, not humans. Nia was confused. She had never considered the possibility that orcs might have families and raised children. The orcs who came to the Holy Kingdom were invaders. They were hated enemies. Therefore, she had stopped thinking about them in any other sense. As Nia sank into confusion, the Saucer King opened the door. The vile odor intensified, and there were several screams. The undead. It's a skeleton. Why? Those bastard humans. They sold us to the undead. They're actually using the undead. Those filthy humans. Ma. Save me. My boy. The Saucer King stopped at the entrance. As expected, even the Saucer King was puzzled by this. RAM. Silence. After the Saucer King bellowed his order, the noisy room fell silent. Of course, that was only for a moment. It immediately filled back up with a racket that was several times louder than before. They were wailing about roughly the same things. No, there seemed to be more voices bemoaning their fate and begging for mercy for their children, regardless of what happened to themselves. Ha! The Saucer King sighed, as though he were tired. After that he slammed on the door. His bony white hands possessed incredible power, and the door bounced away, swinging out until it struck the wall with an incredible sound. The demi-humans fell silent immediately. Shut up. The next one of you who speaks without permission had better be ready to die. The Saucer King took a step into a room that seemed to have been frozen in silence, with some parents trying desperately to cover their children's mouths, and the demi-humans all retreated from him. I did not come here to kill you. On the contrary, I am here to save you. Usually, Nia the human would have a lot of difficulty trying to read the face of a demi-human such as an orc. However, just this once, Nia was absolutely confident in herself. Every single one of them was going no way. Explain to everyone at once is troublesome. Send out a representative. A moment later, an orc looked like he was about to rise, but the orc beside him stopped him. However, he still took a step forward. He may have been a skinny orc, but he had clearly possessed a strong body once. May I assume that you are the representative? The orc said nothing and simply nodded. What's wrong? Why do you not speak? Ah, perhaps it is because your majesty ordered him to shut up just now. While I felt that I had given my permission, it would seem nobody understood it that way. You, the orc who has stepped forward, I permit you to speak. Begin by stating your name. I am Dial of the Ganzu tribe, Dial Ganzu. Dial, then. Here is my first question. Are there people here you do not know, or whose personalities have changed drastically? No, there's nobody like that. Next, tell me why you are imprisoned here. You know that demon called Jaldari, right? Of course I do. He is my enemy. Rather, you could say I came here to the Holy Kingdom in order to kill him. Their faces still said no way, as expected. Indeed, Nia might have thought the same way before she had come to understand the Saucer King. However, Nia was different now. Nia looked at the Saucer King's profile, and then she spoke. It is as His Majesty says. I am a person of this country. In that case, you should be able to understand, right? Jaldari led an allied army of demi-humans to invade the Holy Kingdom. Dial's face changed slightly. Wait, a human, probably, a female. What did they mean by probably? She thought, but to Nia, judging the sex of an orc would be very difficult. It would probably be the same way for them as well. We did not attack this country. Nobody from the orc tribes should have helped Jaldari. Because of that, he brought us who defied him along to this place as punishment. And what did Jaldari do after he brought you here? The Saucer King's question seemed to give Dial and the other orcs a powerful shock. The orcs who looked like mothers clutched their children tightly. After that, there were sounds of moaning and vomiting. What happened here, seriously? The Saucer King could not help but say, it seems I've asked a question I shouldn't have asked. Shall I bring some water? Or do you want something else? The Saucer King's attitude seemed to have changed. For some reason, he seemed very nervous. Perhaps he felt guilty about asking the orcs about a question that had dredged up bad memories. While it might be somewhat rude to think of him that way, the Saucer King looked like a parent trying to comfort another child which their own offspring had driven to tears. This is something only a king who counts both humans and demi-humans as his subjects would do. To the people of the Holy Kingdom, demi-humans were the enemy. Therefore, under identical circumstances, they would not say anything kind or comforting. We do not want anything else. But we beg you not to ask us what happened. You would not enjoy hearing it, and it was a hellish experience for us. If you order us to speak of it, we will do so, but I pray you will do it away from others. please. After hearing the sobs and weeping of the female orcs, Nia began to feel a little afraid of what had happened to them. How vexing, the Saucer King muttered to himself, but so much had happened that Nia did not know what he was referring to. Well, since you seem to be enemies of Jaldari, why not discuss the matter of joining forces with us, since we have a common foe? Dial shifted his gaze downwards. We had thought of fighting once, but now we no longer think of such things. Been broken by the fiendish things which happened here. We no longer have the courage to fight. Then if I free you, what will you do? If possible, we would like to return to our villages. If there are still people who are safe there, we would like to take them and run far, far away, until we find a place where Jaldari cannot reach us. The Saucer King nodded. Then, come to the domain which I rule. Please allow us to refuse. I am keenly aware of the dangers of upsetting you, but even if we agree here, we will surely flee once we reach a place where we can escape. However, betrayal is the vilest act imaginable. Then, we should refuse here, since what awaits us is a death that will not be so agonizing. What? The Saucer King was probably a little baffled by this staunch refusal. However, Nia keenly understood what Dial was thinking. That was because until she had met the Saucer King, Nia had felt that the undead were the enemy of all that lived. No, but my domain is not a fearsome place, you see. There's many demi-humans who live there, you know. You're lying. It sounds like a lie. We won't be tricked. You're talking about demi-human undead, aren't you? Dial seemed to have gone half mad, but he was just like how she had been in the past. Then, as one who had some experience in these matters, she ought to tell him about the true face of the Sorceress Kingdom. His Majesty is telling the truth. He is a great man who, while being undead, also possesses a heart filled with compassion for all living things. He loves children, he rules demi-humans fairly, and he receives the respect of his subordinates. As proof of that, they have even built enormous statues of him which astound all who see them. Ms. Byraha. Really, that's enough. But, Your Majesty, please, say no more. Since he had said, please, she had no choice but to keep quiet. Human, have you been brainwashed? I have not. I have seen His Majesty's kingdom with my own eyes. The first demi-human I saw was a Naga. There was a commotion as the demi-humans looked at each other. There were voices asking, "What's a Naga?" But they were ignored. Also, I saw a rabbit-like demi-human. I am not a citizen of the Sorceress Kingdom. Therefore, my time there was short. Even so, it was enough for me to understand what was going on. The people living there did not have pained and frightened looks on their faces like you do. And of course, none of them were covered in cuts and bruises like you. The demi-humans looked down at their stick-thin bodies. Their muscles had shriveled up, and they were little more than skin and bone. It is as she as Ms. Byraha says. That said, you will probably not believe me. However, once you become my vassals, I will never allow you to suffer such cruelty again. I can swear that to you upon my name, Ainzul Gaon. The reason for that is because all that I rule belongs to me. Should it be damaged, it is the same as damaging my property. Therefore, you may be at ease. If you do not wish to accept my rule, I will not force you to do so. Live as you please. In any case, I shall prepare to send you back to your homes. Why are you being so kind to us? This was the first time Dial had cast aside his preconceived notions. Nia could feel him looking at the Saucer King himself. Fu. I wish to defeat Jaldari. Therefore, the demi-humans under him are quite troublesome. Having you go back to your villages is also a way of eroding his power. What do you mean? Unlike Jaldari, I am a merciful king. If you spread the word for me, that will surely cause unrest throughout his forces, and there might even be those who decide to turn coat and support us, don't you think? I see. So that's how it is. It was difficult for people to put their faith in benefits offered to them with no strings attached, but a mutually beneficial transaction was more trustworthy. It would seem the same logic applied to demi-humans. However, don't you think that'll be difficult? Many of Jaldabaoth's vassals are bloodthirsty maniacs. Even if we spread the word in our villages, it would not have much effect. That's fine too. Intend to use everything I can use. And if Jaldari carries out a reign of terror, there might be demi-humans who will betray him too. Speaking of which, will you not help me fight Jaldari? We can't. We've told you before, right? We don't have the will for that now. Huh? What a shame. And you still do not wish to come to the Sorceress Kingdom. Indeed, it would be a good thing to live under the protection of a mighty being like yourself. However, this is not a decision we can make by ourselves. Depending on the result of our discussion with the others, we might end up relying on you. Dial. Donbase. I know what you want to say. However, with the appearance of Jaldari, a fiend against whom we are helpless, we cannot protect our villages by ourselves. Sooner or later, this will be our fate. The orc called Donbase bit to his lip and looked down. He understood that point as well. Is that so? Then, if you come to my country, then I, the Sorcerer King, will offer you my full support. Many species live upon my land. At that time, I hope you will work together with them, live with them as people of my country. The Sorcerer King's tone softened. Demi-humans were viewed as the enemy in the Holy Kingdom, yet in the Sorceress Kingdom they were seen as beings with whom one could coexist. From where did this enormous difference spring? As Nia thought about it, she immediately found the answer. It's because of His Majesty. Huh? Because His Majesty possesses such incredible power. As I thought. Power is what's important. Now then, after this, I will provide the rations you will need until you return to your villages. In addition, I will supply soldiers to defend you. Returning home safely with those bodies of yours will require much time and effort. You would go this far for us? Of course I would. Do weep and wail at great length about the generosity and magnanimity of the Sorceress Kingdom and spread my name. After this, Ms. Bairoha, could I trouble you to leave the room? I am about to use a national secret of the Sorceress Kingdom which I do not wish to allow anyone from another country to see. Understood. Nia stepped out of the room after answering, and she felt a little lonely. The Sorcerer King's words made perfect sense, and while she could understand them, she could not accept them. As she stood outside the broken door, the breathing sounds of orcs from within the room began to dwindle. It was as though they were vanishing from the room, and in truth, that was probably the case. The Sorcerer King had once said that as long as he remembered a location, he could teleport to it. He must have used such a spell on them. Soon, the room was silent. A moment later, the sound of footsteps approached near. As her mind registered that fact, she saw that the only person on the other side of the door was the Sorcerer King. Forgive the long wait. No, it was not long at all. The room was empty. He must have used magic potent beyond the ability of Nia to imagine to teleport all the orcs away. Or perhaps he had used some other means. He had teleported him with an item. Then, let's meet with Captain Custodio and hear about our future plans from her. Yes, your servant understands. After exiting the orc internment camp, the two of the Master Paladin they met along the way about Remedio's location. There was no sign of her at the building they were directed to, but Gustavo was there. Oh, Your Majesty. We were just about to invite you over. Gustavo seemed completely different from when they had met him earlier. He was lively, as though the light of hope was spilling out from him, and his voice had perked up too. Had something appeared which had changed the currently dire situation? Perhaps the Saucer King had the same question in his heart, and so he asked, "What happened? Did you receive some good news?" "Yes. There's a very important person you must see. Come this way." If they wanted to show him somebody, he must be a powerful noble, or someone related to the royal family. The Saucer King, trailed by Nia for some reason, was guided to a certain room by Gustavo. It contained several simple wooden chairs. Remedios was seated there, as was a skinny man. The two of them turned to look at the Saucer King as he entered, and they both rose in welcome. "This is the royal brother in whose veins flows the blood of our holy king, Caspon-sama." Indeed, his face resembled the profile of the second holy king which adorned the Holy Kingdom's gold coins. Nia blinked at the fact that someone like this had actually been imprisoned here. "Caspon-sama. This is the king of the sorceress kingdom of Ainzulgaon, His Majesty Ainzulgaon, who has come to aid our nation." "Oh, words cannot express my gratitude, Your Majesty. I am honored to meet you. As others have said, I am the brother who was eclipsed by my outstanding little sister." As the royal brother said something that was very difficult to respond to, Remedios had an annoyed look on her face which seemed to say, "Are you making fun of her?" Still, he was the next successor for the late Holy Queen's position, so she could not put on the same attitude she had held all this time. Thus, Remedios simply cast her eyes downward without saying anything. "Ah, is that so? An honor to meet you, royal brother Dono." Then, their eyes met again. Nia watched and wondered what they were doing, and a moment later the Saucer King extended his hand, which Caspon took. Shaking hands was a practice that arose among those of higher status. When one compared a man who was simply in the line of succession to the throne to someone who ruled a country of his own, however small it was, the latter would be of higher status. The fact that the latter was also aiding the country of the former only served to heighten his importance. The fact that the Saucer King had not immediately extended his hand was probably a sign of respect to the other side. Truly, he is a thoughtful and generous man. That convinced Nia. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw that Caspon was also nodding and making noises of approval. "Your Majesty, I apologize for greeting you in this shabby attire. It would have been well if I could have changed before your arrival, but there is nothing to be ashamed about. Mere clothes cannot degrade a man of class. You must be exhausted from your long imprisonment. Will you not take a seat before speaking? I am grateful for your kindness. Then please allow me to avail myself of your goodwill." The Saucer King was the first to release their handshake, and Caspon sat down after he did. "In any event, I am glad to see your highness is safe and sound. Still, how did you come to be imprisoned here?" "That was because I happened to flee here. Baron Bagnan took very good care of me." "How is he?" "Captain Custodio. I believe you took him away after he spoke to me. Baron Bagnan's wounds are not severe, and his life is not in danger. However, due to his poor physical condition and great exhaustion, he is still sound asleep. Can the priests not use their magic to aid him? Now would be the time to draw on his intellect." "No. The priests have exhausted their remaining mana on healing the wounded, and they are currently resting. I sincerely apologize, but if the situation is not critical, I feel it is better to let them conserve their mana." "If that's the case, then it can't be helped, Captain. However, he was the one who brought me here and fought desperately to protect me. If possible, please, you understand what I'm saying, right?" It was not Remedios, but Gustavo who nodded deeply. "All right, then there is one thing I must verify first. Is there anyone in this country who can see through shape-shifting or illusions? Why do you ask, Your Majesty? That is because I am wary of demons using magic to hide themselves among the imprisoned people. Caspond looked at Remedios. Captain, can you answer His Majesty's question? Ah, my apologies. Please answer on my behalf, Vice Captain. I do not recall anyone like that. The Saucer King went and sank into contemplation. Caspond then asked Remedios another question. If it troubles the Saucer King so, that clearly indicates that this must be a vital question. I shall ask you again. Can you swear to the gods that you do not know? The two paladins nodded, and then Caspond's gaze turned to Nia. Surely he would not know a squire like herself, right? As Nia thought that, she hurriedly nodded as well. So even Squire Byraha does not know. What's wrong? You look puzzled. I've heard your name from the captain. I'm very grateful that you can serve by His Majesty's side. My deepest thanks. Nia hurriedly bowed to Caspond. Just so. She is exceptional. I would like a follower like that. What, surely, you must jest. Nia's voice was trembling. As he saw her in that state, the Saucer King and Caspond laughed happily. Then, they resumed their although the Saucer King had no facial expressions, of course serious looks. While it shames me to admit my ignorance, do demons possess the power to transform into other people? Demons can take human form to make people fall, but that does not mean they can transform into others. It is simply that they can take human form, not that they can imitate anyone's looks. Therefore, if there is anyone unfamiliar among the people imprisoned here, there will be a need to be careful. In that case, we will need to have the people who were captured vouch for each other. Now, illusions are more troublesome. With illusions, one can take the faces of others. For instance, the Saucer King cast a spell, and his skeletal face transformed into that of Caspond. This is an illusion. However, low-level illusions like this one might be able to change one's attire, but not one's voice. Also, they cannot imitate memories and thoughts. Therefore, they will be immediately exposed if someone close to the subject speaks to them. The Saucer King's face resumed its skeletal form. There are many ways to disguise one's clothes and voice. Therefore, the best way is to speak to them and check for a sense of wrongness. His questions to the orcs must have been intended to guard against that, Nia mused. As expected of His Majesty, his considerations are surprisingly thorough. I see. Well, you heard that, no? Go check it out immediately. A moment please. You should also consider the possibility of a demon running amok once it is exposed. Do you not think that letting a powerful person like Captain Custodio stay by your side to protect you would be better? I see. I understand. I will perform investigations with the captain as a witness. Gustavo bowed his head. Royal Brother Dono. That is all I wish to verify. If you have more to say, then by all means. Then Your Majesty. As for our future plans, I feel it is necessary for us to head south, link up with the local forces and then launch a full-scale attack. That is because there were several nobles imprisoned with me, and I wish to ask them to see who can lend their strength to us. That is the plan I intend to adopt. I do not understand this country's nobles, so if you feel that is best then by all means. Will you not attack the other prison camps and rescue the prisoners there? It is not yet time for that. Leading many people to areas controlled by Jaldari is very obvious, and our rate of advance will become very slow. I wish to avoid an outcome where we lose more than we gain by helping others. Then why not let the civilians flee south while we alone attack the prison camps? Captain Custodio, you were allowed to be present, but I did not seek your opinion. Caspond spoke in a tone that was completely different from how he addressed the Saucer King. Remedios clenched her teeth as she bit back her anger. I also approve of royal brother No. Gaspondono's opinion. However, you have already taken 2 prison camps, including this place. Imagine you can continue to skillfully apply the experience gained here, do you not? We shall do nothing. Caspon shrugged. I do not feel we can take this land back without deaths or wounded. The number of casualties will grow from the tens, to the hundreds, to the thousands. There is something else which is more important than this. As they heard his words, which cast the people aside, Nia saw looks of shock cross Remedios and Gustavo's faces. As for Nia herself, she calmly thought, this is all ordinary royals amount to. Caspon-sama, you've changed. In the past you were a great man who was as kind to the masses as Her Majesty. What's this, Captain Custodio? Are you disappointed? HMPH. Caspon's face twisted. His lips curled, baring his teeth. His razor-sharp gaze was full of mockery. Your heart would be as twisted as mine if you had tasted the same hell I did. I can't spout pretty words anymore, huh? They make me sick. As for what did they do to us? I guess you haven't heard yet. In that case, go find someone and ask them. That way, you'll know exactly how evil and blasphemous demons are. He was like a completely different person, or perhaps it would be more accurate to say that the inky black substance under his forcibly repaired personality had emerged again. If possible, I'd like to kill all those demi-humans. He glanced at the Saucer King, who shrugged and answered, you may do as you please after you've questioned them. I've already liberated the orcs. That can't be helped, then. What a shame. Well, the orcs tasted misery alongside me. Although, could you hand them over to me in exchange for the holy sword? I am a magic caster. What would I do with a sword even if you gave it to me? Caspon chuckled at the Saucer King's playful reply. On the other hand, Remedio's blank face stood as a contrast to Gustavo's pale features. It sounded like a joke, but Caspon was probably serious. Nia's body trembled. To think he hated those imprisoned demi-humans enough that he was willing to hand over a national treasure just to get them back in his hands. What on earth had happened to him? So you will abandon this city? I would like to if I could. But before that, I want to interview some of the prisoners and send messengers to the south. I think that will take a week at the earliest. When we take this land back, I shall offer you a gratuity corresponding to your kindness in addition to what Captain Custodio has already arranged. I do look forward to that. The Saucer King left with Nia a minute later. Caspon went. All right. Since the Saucer King is already gone, let's get to the main event. Yes. Protecting this many people at once will be very difficult. If possible, I believe we will need to borrow reinforcements from the south, or perhaps obtain some sort of transport like horses and carriages. Caspon smiled thinly as he heard Gustavo's suggestion. What nonsense are you spouting? Who said we're talking about that? Were we not supposed to consider how to move ourselves south? Let me speak plainly. We will not flee south right away. We will do battle with Jaldabaoth's army here. That's far too rash. As she heard Gustavo's words, Remedios continued speaking. While we have city walls, we'll be finished once we're surrounded and the food runs out. A siege would be foolish without reinforcements to count on. While Remedios may not have been good at thinking, she was very reliable when it came to battle. Gustavo nodded as he heard his captain's confident words. Even so, we must fight here. As the two of them turned questioning gazes on him, Caspon smiled cruelly and explained himself. You heard it too, right? The Saucer King is conserving his mana for the battle with Jaldri. After seeing Gustavo nod, Caspon continued. That would be troublesome. After he defeats Jaldari and takes the Maid Demons, the Sorcerer King will return to the Sorceress Kingdom. Before that, we need to have him decrease the amount of demi-humans who have invaded this nation. Therefore, we must place ourselves in dire straits. But our agreement with the Sorcerer King. Every time the Sorcerer King slays several demi-humans with his magic, fewer people of the Holy Kingdom will be lost. No. Which will you choose? Your pact with the undead, or the lives of the Holy Kingdom's innocent civilians? Gustavo had a bitter look on his face while the blank-faced Remedios promptly answered. The innocence of the Holy Kingdom, of course. That's how it is, Captain. Therefore, you must make the Sorcerer King fight. Since we have made an agreement, there must be a good reason to break it. And so we must fight Jaldabaoth's army for that. Correct. Or rather, we began our work to flee to the south, but since we took more time than we expected, we were surrounded by Jaldabaoth's army. With no options left, we had no choice but to seek the Sorcerer King's strength. What do you think? He's right, Remedios and Gustavo's eyes seemed to say to each other. However, I have a question. What if the mana that the Sorcerer King expends becomes a disadvantage during the battle with Jaldari? I hear mana can be recovered quickly. No. My sister said so too. Remedio's little sister was a priestess. If she said, I heard it from her, nobody could refute it. We'll release a few demi-humans on purpose and lure Jaldabaoth's army here. We need to do it before we run out of rations, Aremba. But how many of Jaldabaoth's men will come? The three of them had already shared what they knew. After a series of battles, Jaldabaoth's army was less than 100,000 strong. The army was formed of 12 species, as well as 6 other species who were not numerous enough to qualify as armies in their own right, for a total of 18 species. The 12 races were snake men, serpent-headed demi-humans, considered close relatives of lizard men. Armats, a bipedal rat-like species with iron-like fur. They were considered close relatives of the quagga. Cabins, they resembled apes that were slightly larger than human beings, whose eyes had atrophied. Zerns, a slimy species with whose upper bodies were like eels with arms and whose slimy lower bodies were like blue-colored maggots. Some people wondered, are you sure they aren't heteromorphs? But they were affected by spells that worked on demi-humans, so they were classed as demi-humans. Bladers, an insectile species whose fingernails sprouted knife-like blades and whose bodies were protected by an armor-like exoskeleton. Much like the Zerns, they were also affected by spells that worked on demi-humans, so they were classed as demi-humans. Harunas, demi-humans with horse-like legs who were adept at sprinting. They could run for long periods without rest and possessed shocking mobility. Spiders, spider-like demi-humans with 4 long and slender arms and legs who resembled spiders. They could spit all sorts of silk from their mouths and make all manner of clothes and items with that silk. The silk clothing they made in this way was as hard as steel. Stone eaters armed with crude weapons, their most frightening feature was their ability to spit the rocks they ate. They could spit stone fragments that could easily dent metal armor, and do so at ranges in excess of 100 meters. However, they could only do that a limited number of times, so if one could weather their onslaught, they were nothing to fear. Orthrus, they were a version of centaurs whose lower bodies were replaced by those of carnivorous beasts. They had better fighting power than centaurs, but conversely they were less mobile. Magillos, born with the ability to use spells of up to the 4th tier. The spells they could use apparently appeared on their bodies like tattoos. Their more powerful members were covered in tattoos. Sometimes there were individuals who could develop skills as magic casters, and those were rumored to be able to cast spells of up to the 5th tier. They might be Lord Levalinti's Pteropus, a species which lived on cliff sides. They were very adept at long-distance gliding. While they could fly, it seemed to require a lot of strength, so they could only fly for a while every day, and after that they could not even glide. If they did not fly, they could rend armor with the wind, so defending against it was very difficult. They were a species which was stronger when they could not fly. And then, there were the Baffic. The remaining 6 races were not particularly numerous, but each of them was quite powerful. Ogres. Buryans, an ogre-like race with the power to control the earth, who could be considered a superior species. They possessed special abilities associated with the earth. Varuns, similar to Buryans, they were water-controlling beings. They had water-linked special abilities. Nagarajas, they looked like snakes with scaly bodies and arms. They were a completely different species from the similarly named Nagas, and they did not get along well with the latter. They were born with the ability to cast many spells, and sometimes they would even equip themselves with swords and armor. Spriggans, a species that could freely change their size from small to large. They were fundamentally a good species, and evil Spriggans were very rare. That said, both good and bad Spriggans were unmanageable when they went berserk. Zostia, carnivores with the upper bodies of beastmen. They were relatives of centaurs and Orthrus. They wore plate armor and carried round shields. They had no special abilities, but they were heavy cavalry with the savagery and strength of wild beasts. Just one of them was very powerful, and the Orthrus often relied on them. It was apparently a relationship like the one between goblins and hobgoblins. However, due to their lack of special abilities, they were not very strong foes against adventurers who could cast the fly spell. Still, in a head-to-head clash, even Orichalcum-ranked adventurers would have a hard time. According to the Saucer King, your base might be under surveillance, right? Then if they know how many troops we have, they might not send too many troops over. That works to our advantage. However, there's a problem. Food. Yes. While the priests can make food, they can only make very little even after exhausting their mana. They also can't feed like demi-humans. Remedios and Gustavo had looks of distaste on their faces. All 3 of them knew that demi-humans preyed on humans. Therefore, even if they tried to starve the invading demi-humans, they all knew they would lose in the end. That was because the demi-humans' prison camps could be considered larders for them. Go check how long our food can hold. We're checking already. We're also looking for any blacksmiths who might be able to modify the demi-human gear for use by humans. I expected nothing less of you, Captain. The 3 of them continued discussing their preparations for the siege. After another hour, they reached a conclusion which all of them could accept, and the 3 of them smiled. All right, then let's prepare for the siege. 1 week later, as their food supplies dwindled and it was about time for them to move, the demi-human army appeared from over the horizon. However, it was a massive army whose scale far exceeded their expectations.